During a brutal drought, a starving wild bobcat is driven out of the hills and slips into a quiet suburb. She chooses the yard of an elderly man who lives alone, and he begins leaving a secret plate of food for her every night. But on the very night he suddenly collapses inside his house, the bobcat finds no food waiting, and does something no one would expect, drawing the whole neighborhood into the story, and quietly saving the life of the only human who ever helped her. The drought had been coming for a long time, but Sage felt it most in her bones. For seasons, the bobcat had known these hills as a place of quiet balance. The rocky outcrops, the dry grass, the low twisted shrubs, this was her country. She knew every scent on the wind, every rabbit trail, every hollow where a mouse might pause for too long. She had survived winter ice and summer heat. Until this year, the land had always given her just enough. Then the water stopped. The creek that once cut a silver line through the valley had shrunk day by day, until one morning it was nothing more than a dark scar in the dirt. The mud cracked, curled, and hardened. Where Sage had once stepped in cool, shaded water, her paws now crunched on dry stone and broken earth. Hunting grew harder. The cottontails that had once darted between scrub bushes were thin and jumpy. The mice stayed deep in the ground. Even the quail, always quick to burst from the brush, seemed to vanish into the pale, shimmering heat. Sage was not young and not old. Her body was lean and strong, her coat a mottled blend of tawny gold and shadowy spots that melted into the landscape. She had walked these ridges alone for years. Solitude had always suited her. She hunted alone, slept alone, moved like a secret through her own quiet kingdom. Then everything changed when the three small lives arrived. They had come into the world in a shallow den tucked beneath a jumble of rocks and roots, eyes sealed, bodies warm and blind against her belly. She had cleaned them, nuzzled them, listened to their tiny squeaks with a deep, steady calm. She named them in her own way, not with human words, but with scents and sounds. The one who wriggled the most, the one who stayed pressed close, the one whose tiny paws seemed always to knead at the air. In another place, in another year, her milk would have flowed strong, and her hunting would have fed them well. But the drought slipped into every part of her days. Her milk grew thin when her own ribs began to show. The kits' cries grew sharper, more urgent. Their hunger tugged at her with a force no dry wind could match. She ranged farther each night. At first she hunted the old familiar ground, the dry wash where rabbits once sheltered, the cool shadows of the cedars. She moved as she always had, with patient grace, her paws silent, her ears pricked forward. Yet time and again she pounced and found only dust. A rustle turned out to be a leaf, not a mouse. A shape in the grass slipped away just before her claws closed. When she did catch something, it was small, a skinny rabbit, a half-grown squirrel. She carried each kill back to the den with care, feeling the weight of it between her jaws, knowing it would not be enough. The kits would press against her, eyes now open but cloudy, their mewling thin. They chewed clumsily at what she brought, then searched for milk that no longer came easily. Their small tongues against her fur were both comfort and accusation. Days passed. The sun baked the hillsides until even the hardy shrubs dropped their leaves. The air smelled of dust and dry bark, and more of death. Here a bird that had fallen from the sky. There a fawn that had not made it to the next patch of shade. The land was growing tired, and all who lived on it were paying the price. On one long, empty night, Sage followed the old game trails higher than she normally would. The stars overhead were cold and distant. Her paws found the paths by memory. But even up there, where the wind should have been cooler, the heat clung to the rocks. She paused at the crest of a ridge and lifted her head. That was when she saw them. Not stars, not lightning, but a scatter of steady, unnatural lights humming far beyond the dark line of the hills. They glowed in clusters, soft and amber, like a strange field of fireflies that never moved. The town had always been there, a faint glow on the horizon, but tonight it seemed closer, brighter, pressing in against the edges of her world. On the wind, along with the dusty scent of dry grass, came other smells. Hot pavement, metal, oil, the sharp tang of trash, and somewhere beneath all that, the rich, heavy smell of food. It was a confusing mix, both inviting and alarming. Her muscles tensed without her thinking. Town meant people. People meant noise, dogs, metal machines, and the unknown. Her kind stayed away from such places. The wild and the human world had their own borders, and she had always honored them. Behind her, far below in the rocks, 3 small bodies slept fitfully, bellies not quite full, voices hoarse from crying. The memory of their earlier cries seemed to echo in her ears even now, though the night was silent. Sage lowered her head and started back down the slope. This was not her place. She belonged to shadows and scrub, to the sharp, clean scent of stone and sagebrush. The lights on the horizon were for other creatures. Halfway down the hill, she stopped. Her paws sank into powdery soil that had once been firm. She breathed in and out, feeling the emptiness in her own stomach. The land she knew was failing her, and by failing her, it was failing them. There were no full nights anymore, no easy hunts, no gentle mornings where the kits slept heavy and satisfied at her side. She turned her head and looked back over her shoulder. The lights were still there, quietly burning, patient and distant. The smell of food carried on the breeze again, faint but undeniable. Instinct pulled her in 2 directions at once. One part of her body wanted to flee, to run back to the safety of the den and wait for the next night and the next and the next until the land somehow forgave them. Another part, quieter but stronger, understood that waiting might mean watching her kits grow weaker until their cries stopped altogether. She thought of the smallest one, the one who tired the quickest, whose head grew heavy as soon as he finished the last scraps she could bring. She thought of the way his sides moved up and down, too fast as he slept. The wind shifted. The smell of the town reached her again. Cooked meat. Garbage. Dogs. People. Danger and hope tangled together. Sage stood very still on the slope, paws braced on the broken ground, ears alert, tail low, eyes fixed on the line of lights. A bobcat's world was not meant to include streets and fences and backyards. But this year the creek had dried, the prey had vanished, and the old rules were breaking along with the earth. Alone under the wide, empty sky, Sage made a choice. For the sake of the 3 small hearts beating in the darkness behind her, she would follow the scent of food, even if it led her into the glow of human lights. The town was quieter than Sage expected. From the ridge it had looked like a cluster of restless stars, buzzing and bright, a place of constant motion. But when she reached the outer edge, moving low along the dry ditch that paralleled the road, the noise was softer than the light suggested. The air held the distant hum of something that did not sleep, machines perhaps, but the houses themselves sat in rows, still and watchful. She paused in the shadow of a scrubby bush that clung to the edge of a gravel lot, ears swiveling. The ground beneath her paws felt wrong, packed and flat, smelling of dust and stone and something sharp, like burned air. The faint line of an old coyote trail had been cut off and buried under pavement. Her world interrupted. Ahead, rectangular shapes rose one after another, each with its own patch of grass, its own fence, its own glow. Sage sniffed. Here the smells were layered thick, crowded in on top of each other. Dogs, many of them, each with its own bite of scent, some bold and fresh, some old and faint. Cats, too, though their trails were lighter, scattered, less grounded. People, everywhere, hot metal and cold concrete. Trash bins full of things that once were food and now were sour and heavy. Beneath it all, she caught what she had come for. The dense, rich smell of cooked meat and bones drifting from somewhere ahead and to the left. She moved as she always had, one careful paw at a time, body close to the ground. The open stretches of trimmed grass made her uneasy. She preferred the narrow spaces where bushes and shadows overlapped. She slipped through gaps in old chain link, ducked behind storage sheds, hugged the dark side of parked vehicles that sat heavy on their tires. A dog barked suddenly from a yard 2 houses over. The sound was sharp, echoing off walls and fences. Sage dropped flat, muscles coiled, eyes narrowed. The dog barked again, then turned its voice toward something else, a passing car, a raccoon. A sound only it understood. The noise settled back into the night. No one came out. No door opened. Sage exhaled slowly and moved on. On the far end of the cul-de-sac, there was a house that did not glow as brightly as the others. Its porch light was off, its curtains drawn. The grass in the yard was dry and patchy, like the hills she knew, and the shrubs were left to grow their own shapes. The air around it felt less sharp, less busy. The rich smell of meat was strongest here, threaded through with something quieter. Old wood, dust, and a single human scent, familiar now that she was close enough to separate it from the crowd. She lingered near the corner of the yard, hidden by a bush that had not been trimmed in a long time. A back door, set in the pale wall of the house, opened onto a small concrete step and a short run of cracked path that led to a shed. Beside the door sat a metal can, its lid slightly crooked. From there, the smells rose in thick waves. Bones, fat, scraps of skin, something fried not long ago. Her stomach clenched, a hard twist that made her sides ache. Instinct told her this was not prey. It was not the chase she knew, the soft scuffle in the grass, the leap and grab. This was food that had been changed by fire and hands and vessels she did not understand. Another instinct told her that food was food, no matter how it came. She waited, nose lifted, listening. Inside the house, a faint blue light flickered against thin curtains. A voice murmured, low and steady, then stopped. Something clicked. Silence followed, thick and deep, like the hush that falls after a hawk's shadow passes overhead. No footsteps approached. No door opened. Sage eased out of the cover of the bush and crossed the patch of ground between her and the back step. The short grass brushed against her legs, dry and brittle. Every hair along her spine stood half on end. Her ears were forward, the rest of her body ready to twist and spring back if danger came from the door or from some unseen angle. She eased her head toward the metal can. The lid wobbled under the slightest touch of her nose, making a small, hollow sound. She froze. Nothing moved inside the house. No light changed. Slowly, she nudged the lid aside with a paw, claws just barely out enough to grip the edge. The lid scraped, tilted, and tipped to the ground with a dull clank. The smell that rushed out hit her like a wave, strong, fatty, tangled with things she could not name, but her body recognized as sustenance. She reached in and pulled out a bone with shreds of meat still clinging to it. Across the room from the back door, Henry Cole stood in the dark, one hand resting against the kitchen counter. He had lived in this house longer than he cared to count. The neighborhood had changed around him. Kids grown up and moved out. New families moved in, cars replaced with quieter, shinier models, but his habits had remained much the same. He ate simple meals, watched the late news, washed his plate, turned off the lights. The days stacked up in quiet little piles. Tonight, something had tugged at him as he turned toward bed. A sense, more than a sound at first, that the world just beyond his back door was not as empty as it looked. He had flipped off the last light and started down the short hall, then paused. In the thin rectangle of glass over the sink, he thought he saw movement. A shadow sliding past, larger than a cat, smaller than a man. He had told himself it was nothing. His mind, maybe, putting shapes where there were none. But now, standing motionless, he heard it. the faint metal chime of a lid, the scrape of something against the side of the trash can. Henry's heart gave a small, unexpected jump. Raccoon, he thought first. Maybe a stray dog. But something in the way the sound stopped and started, cautious and deliberate, made him think of the brief glimpse he'd had a few nights earlier. A shape crossing the far corner of his yard, low and fluid, eyes bright in the porch light spill. A wild cat. Bigger than any house cat, with spots he'd told himself he might have imagined. He moved closer to the window over the sink, slow so the boards under his feet would not complain. With the inside light off, the glass reflected only a faint outline of his own face, but beyond that, the night scene came into focus. At first, all he saw was his yard, dry grass, the crooked shed, the back step. Then his eyes adjusted, and there she was. The animal stood at the open trash can, shoulders rolling under a thin coat, head bent as she worried at something with sharp, quick movements. Her ears flicked back and forth, never resting. Even from this distance he could see the definition of her ribs beneath her fur. When she lifted her head, a bone held between her teeth. The porch light from next door caught the pattern on her coat. Tawny gold broken by dark spots and faint stripes, the short bobbed tail twitching behind her. Henry held his breath. A bobcat right there on his cracked little patch of concrete. He had seen their pictures on warning signs at trailheads years ago when his knees still let him walk in the hills. Back then, the animals were shapes on posters and stories in other people's mouths. Keep your distance. Report sightings. They stay away from town, mostly. Nothing to worry about. Yet here one was, so thin it made his chest ache to look at her. She paused for a moment and turned her head toward the house. Her eyes met the dark rectangle of the window where he stood. He didn't know if she could see him, just a dim outline behind the glass, but for a heartbeat it felt like she did. There was no snarl, no flash of teeth, just a hard, measuring look, the look of a creature that had been pushed to the edge and was deciding what risks were worth taking. Henry's fingers curled against the counter. "You poor thing," he whispered, though the words were lost in the quiet kitchen. Outside, Sage listened to the strange, muffled pulse of the human den, ears cupping the sound. She heard no immediate threat in it. The light inside stayed off. The world remained as it was. Her at the can, the hunger in her belly, the three small bodies waiting in the rocks beyond the hills of this odd-smelling place. She dropped the bone, seized a larger piece of meat and gristle, and turned away from the house, muscles ready to sprint if anything changed. Her paws touched the ground without a sound as she slipped back into the deeper shadows at the edge of the yard. By the time Henry found the courage to move again, she had melted into the darkness, leaving only the crooked lid, a smear of grease on the concrete, and the echo of wild eyes in his mind. The next night, Sage came back more quickly. The trip from the den to the town had become a line drawn in her mind. Down the dry wash, across the gravel edge, along the strip of bushes that bordered the last row of houses. Her paws remembered each dip and stone. The kits had eaten well from the scraps she had carried home. Their cries had been softer, their sleep deeper. For the first time in many nights she had rested without waking at every breath they took. Now hunger drove her again, but there was something else too. A memory of that yard with its crooked shed, its quiet house, and its metal can overflowing with food she had not had to chase. When she reached the backside of the neighborhood, the air was cooler. The day's heat still clung to the pavement, but the light had thinned. Windows glowed softly. Somewhere, a television murmured. A dog barked once half-heartedly, then settled. Sage slipped past fences and shrubs, hugging the deep line of shadow where yards backed up to the open lot. When she reached the familiar house at the end, she stopped. The back step was the same. The trash can was there, lid straight this time, pressed on tight. The small concrete square still held the smear of grease from the night before. But something new had appeared. On the grass, just at the edge of where the porch light from next door faded into darkness, sat a shallow white dish. In it was meat, not buried beneath other smells, not tangled with paper or metal. Just pieces, set out plainly, the scent rising warm in the cool night air. Sage's ears flicked forward. She lowered her head and pulled the air deeper into her nose. It was the same human scent as the one in the house, the one that had clung to the lid of the trash can, the one she had learned to separate from the others. The dish had been placed there deliberately, as surely as a rabbit's trail is laid by its own running. Henry had stood for a long time at his counter earlier that evening, looking at the plate in his hands. Leftover meatloaf, a bit of gravy, the sort of thing he might have wrapped and put in the refrigerator for another meal. But the image of the bobcat's ribs under her coat, of the way she had held herself taut and wary by the trash can, would not leave his mind. He had never been the kind to feed wildlife. Signs in the parks made that clear enough. Do not feed. Do not approach. Let them stay wild. Still, standing there with the cold plate and the quiet house around him, he could not shake the simple thought that had come and stayed. She is hungry. So he had taken an old dish from the cabinet, one that matched nothing else, and spooned the leftover meat onto it. His hands moved slower than they once did, but steady. He opened the back door just a crack, the night air slipping in, and set the dish down on the grass where it could be reached without crossing into the harsh cone of the neighbor's motion light. Then he closed the door and turned off the kitchen light, letting the dark settle. Now, watching from that same window, he saw the shape glide into view again. The bobcat paused at the corner of the yard, exactly where she had the night before. She was all shadow at first, then the faint spill of distant light picked out the curve of her shoulders, the small black tufts on her ears, the short tail held low and ready. She saw the dish. For a long moment nothing in her moved except her nose. The smells here were layered, his own scent on the dish, the soap from his hands, the food itself, the dry grass, the ghost of the grease mark on the concrete. Underneath it all, the town hummed. She listened for danger, for the quick rhythm of footsteps, for the sharp yip of a dog catching her scent. None came. She stepped forward. Each pace was measured, muscles coiled under her skin. She did not walk straight to the dish. Instead, she curved in a slow arc, passing behind the shed, pausing to sniff the air from a different angle. She checked the fence line, the neighboring yard, the shadow under the back steps. Only when she had circled back, satisfied that nothing waited in the dark, did she approach the food. Henry's fingers rested lightly on the counter's edge. He felt his own breath catch as though she might hear it. She lowered her head and took a small piece first, as if testing more than just the taste. Her teeth closed, her jaws working slowly. It was soft, rich. It filled her mouth and throat with warmth instead of dust. Her stomach, empty for too long, seized with sudden need. She swallowed and reached for more. The dish was empty sooner than Henry expected. She did not linger over it. She ate with a quiet urgency, never once truly relaxing, her eyes lifting between bites to sweep the yard and the house. When the last scrap was gone, she licked the dish once, then stepped back. For a moment, she simply stood, looking toward the dark rectangle of the window. Henry could not see her eyes clearly, not through the glass and the faint reflections, but he felt their presence all the same. A wild animal, close enough to be touched if a wall and a few feet of space did not stand between them, was looking toward where he stood. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, more to the empty air in the kitchen than to her. His voice was rough from disuse. Outside, Sage flicked an ear at the murmur, then turned. She did not bolt. She walked, steady and sure, back across the grass, slipping into the cover of the overgrown shrubs, and then beyond. She carried nothing physical with her this time, no bone or scrap held between her teeth. But as she climbed back toward the hills, a different kind of weight settled into her mind. There was food here, in this strange borderland between stone and light. It had been set out in the open, not hidden, not fought over. Dangerous, yes, but the world she had always trusted had grown dangerous too in its own slow, starving way. When she reached the den, the kits stirred, noses twitching as they picked up the scents from her fur. She curled her body around them, feeling their warmth press against her aching sides. Their small heads nudged at her, seeking milk, and though she still did not have as much as before, it came more easily now that she had eaten. Their cries softened into soft suckling sounds, then into sleep. High above, the town's glow painted a faint halo on the sky, a reminder that the border between the wild and the human world had shifted for a little while. In the days before the drought, her hunting had followed the patterns of the land alone. Now, another pattern had been added: the quiet house, the dish on the grass, the man she could not quite see. Sage rested her chin on her paws and closed her eyes, but did not fully sleep. Somewhere inside, a new line had been drawn, connecting the rocky den and that patch of dry yard. She knew she would walk it again. The path between the rocky den and the quiet little house at the end of the street became a habit. Night after night, Sage traced the same line down the dry wash and across the gravel fringe of the town, slipping through the overgrown corners of yards and along the shadows of fences. The air along that route began to carry two sets of smells that belonged to her: the dust and stone of the hills clinging to her fur as she left, and the faint tang of soap and cooked meat clinging to her coat as she returned. Henry kept putting out the dish. Sometimes it held leftover chicken, sometimes scraps of beef, or a slice of meatloaf pressed flat with the back of a fork so any bones would show. He moved slowly, stiff knees and careful steps, but his hands were steady. Each time he placed the dish a little closer to the back step without quite realizing he was doing it. A few inches one night, a foot the next. He told himself it was just convenience. It was easier to open the door and lean over than to walk out into the yard. But part of him also wanted to see her more clearly, to know if she was gaining weight, if her coat looked fuller, if the sharpness had gone out of her ribs. From his kitchen window he watched her come. She was never careless. Even when hunger made her move faster, her head still turned in small, constant checks, ears swiveling, whiskers forward. She approached from different angles, sometimes from behind the shed, sometimes from the far fence, never taking the same direct path twice in a row. It was as if she knew the yard as well as he did now. Each patch of shadow tested and proven. Henry found that he waited for her. He would wash his plate and leave it in the drying rack, then stand for a while with the house quiet around him, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sounds of the neighborhood. When he finally turned off the kitchen light and stepped back into the dark, his eyes would go to the window almost on their own. Most nights she came. The night she didn't, his chest tightened with a worry he could not quite justify. He had lived through storms and power outages and long stretches where the only company he had was the sound of the weather report. Yet now, missing one glimpse of a wild animal in his yard made the house feel emptier than before. Outside his little plot of grass, the rest of the neighborhood went about its business. At the house next door, the porch light burned late, throwing its bright circle over a spotless yard. Across the street, children's bicycles lay in a heap by a front walk. Sprinklers still tried to push a little green out of the stubborn dirt, despite restrictions, leaving dark arcs on the pavement. In the mornings, Henry sometimes heard Mrs. Delgado talking over the fence to another neighbor, her voice carrying easily in the thin air. "I swear I saw something in your yard last night," she said one day, planting her elbows on the fence posts. Big, not a dog either. Henry, out back with his coffee, pretended to focus on the far hills. "Probably just a raccoon," the other neighbor replied. They're all over lately with the drought." "This was no raccoon," she insisted. "It moved like a cat, but too big. You think that's safe, with Tommy coming over weekends?" "Animal control's been on the news," the other woman said. "They said if we see anything strange, call it in." Henry's coffee turned bitter on his tongue. He set the mug down carefully on the railing and kept his face blank. He did not say anything. The words on the television the night before came back to him clearly, the serious man in the uniform standing next to a slide that showed a blurry photo of a bobcat at the edge of a driveway. "If you see one of these in your neighborhood, do not approach," the man had said. "Keep your pets indoors. Call our office. We'll handle it from there. Handle it." Henry knew enough to hear the weight behind that phrase. That night the dish he set out was full. He hesitated with his hand on the doorknob, eyes fixed on the curve of ceramic and the pale shapes of food against it. Then he stepped back and turned the lock, as if that simple motion could keep all the hard choices outside. Sage felt the change in the air before she stepped into the yard. The dish was nearer the house again, settled on the line where the grass ended and the concrete began. The smells around it were the same: meat, gravy, the man's quiet scent, the faint trace of the soap he used on his hands. But another smell hung over the neighborhood now, something sharp and restless. More dogs outside than usual, more people walking to their cars with phones in hand, voices raised a little higher as they talked. She flattened herself against the ground beyond the fence and waited. A car passed on the street out front, its tires whispering over the asphalt. Somewhere down the block, a dog cried out a repetitive alarm, not sure what it was complaining about, but unwilling to stop. A television turned up louder than before, carried the familiar cadence of the news into the night air. Only when the house had settled again into its own rhythm did Sage slip under the loose board in the fence and into the yard. She went to the dish, eating quickly, grateful for the richness of the meat and the solid feel of it in her belly. The nearness of the house prickled her fur. The back door loomed like a rock face that might shift without warning. But hunger dulled the edge of her fear, and the silence behind the door held. When she finished, she did not go back the way she had come. Habit and instinct tugged her along the side of the house, around the corner, and toward the front where another patch of shadow promised a faster path to the open lot. She had taken this way once before, testing the edges of her new hunting ground. Tonight, the scent of another animal lay fresh there, cutting across her usual route like a new branch in a stream. Dog. She paused where the corner met the front yard. The grass here was shorter, trimmed into neat lines. A low hedge ran along the walk. Beyond it, the street glowed under the long arm of a street lamp. The dog scent was strong and recent, ground into the lawn and the air as though the animal paced there often, claiming the space. Sage stayed low and moved forward anyway, keeping close to the house. The dog came out of the darkness as sudden as a thunderclap. One moment the yard ahead of her was empty. The next, a thick-bodied shape lunged from behind a parked truck, nails scrabbling on the sidewalk. Its bark was not half-hearted this time. It was sharp and frantic, driven by a rush of instinct not unlike her own. The dog hit the end of its leash, collar snapping tight, body straining toward her. The sound tore across the quiet block. Porch lights flicked on one after another. A front door opened somewhere, someone calling a name. The dog barked again and again, eyes wide, ears pinned back. Sage did not wait to see if it broke free. She spun, claws digging for purchase in the packed dirt. In her haste, one hind paw slipped on a patch of exposed concrete at the edge of the walk. Her pad skidded, and as she pushed off, one claw snagged and tore. A bright, sharp pain flashed up her leg. She ran anyway, 3 good legs and one burning with each stride, back past the corner of the house and across the yard. The fence loomed ahead. She gathered herself and leapt, clearing the boards with a scramble of claws that left faint scratches in the wood. Behind her, the dog's barks rose to a frantic pitch. A child's voice cried out. A woman hushed him and pulled him back inside. Someone peered down the block, trying to catch a glimpse of what had set the dog off. By the time they looked toward Henry's yard, the bobcat was gone, swallowed by the darkness beyond the last row of houses. Henry had come to the window at the first bark. He saw only a blur, something streaking across his lawn, low and fast, vanishing at the fence. The dog across the way lunged and flailed at its leash, choking itself with its own noise. Neighbors' porch lights flicked on and off like a string of small, nervous suns. When the commotion finally began to die, he stepped outside onto the back step. The dish lay where he had left it, empty but for a sheen of gravy. The grass around it was pressed down in a familiar pattern. As he started to turn back to the house, something on the pale concrete caught his eye. A thin, dark smear near the base of the step, no bigger than a thumbprint, leading into the grass. He crouched carefully, knees protesting, and touched it with one fingertip. It was still tacky. In the dim light from the neighboring porch it looked almost black, but he knew the color well enough. Blood. It was not much. A few drops, a drag where a paw must have slipped. Far too little for a serious wound, but it was enough to put a knot in his throat. "You got yourself hurt out there," he murmured, straightening up with an effort. The yard around him felt suddenly exposed. The fences seemed low, the sky seemed too wide. He stood for a long moment, hand on the doorframe, looking out at the place where the fence broke toward the hills. The world beyond his back gate had always been something he watched from afar, from his recliner, from the news, from river trails he no longer walked. Now some small piece of that world had come to him, hungry and thin and just wild enough to bleed on his concrete. And somewhere in the dry dark beyond the neighborhood, he knew she wasn't alone. No creature got that thin and that desperate living for just itself. He closed the door softly behind him, already thinking of what he could put in the dish tomorrow and how he might set it to keep her from having to cross the front yard again. The night after the barking and the blood, Sage did not go to the town. She stayed with her kits, the pain in her hind paw a steady throb that flared when she shifted her weight. The small tear in the claw was not life-threatening, but it reminded her with every step how close she had come to losing more than a bit of horn and skin. Danger in the hills, she understood. Danger in the streets of humans was new and sharp and hard to measure. The kits sensed her restlessness. They nosed at her, climbing over her forelegs, batting at her twitching tail. Their bellies were fuller now than they had been before she found the quiet house and its dish, but they were growing quickly. Their hunger was growing with them. Ash, the boldest, pawed at the edge of the den's entrance, peering out at the rocks beyond. Bramble stayed pressed close to Sage's side. Thimble, the smallest, shifted between them, never quite sure whether to follow Ash's curiosity or Bramble's caution. By the second night, the ache in Sage's paw had dulled. It was no longer a bright warning, just a reminder. The kit's cries sharpened as the last of her stored strength thinned. The land around the den still lay in silent surrender to the drought. No new sense of prey drifted in on the wind. She listened to the quiet and made a new kind of decision. Before, she had walked the line between the rocks and the town alone, carrying food back in her jaws and in her body. Now the journey itself had become as dangerous as any hunt. The barking dog, the sudden lights, the smell of frightened people. These things would not fade just because she wished them to. And each time she left the kits, she risked more than her own life. There was, she knew, another place now where they might survive. The human yard at the edge of the neighborhood was not safe in the way the old den had once been. It was open in strange directions, bordered by fences instead of cliffs, lit by lights she could not predict. But there was water in the pipes of those houses. She could smell it. There was food in their metal boxes and on their shining plates. and there was one man whose scent was steady and whose actions, so far, had been more kindness than threat. Sage waited until the sky was deep with stars and the town had settled into its thinner, quieter breathing. Then she nudged Ash awake, then Bramble and Thimble, one after the other, licking each small face with slow strokes. Their eyes blinked open, cloudy with sleep and curiosity. She stepped out of the den and stood, letting the night air wash over her. The kits followed, stumbling a little on unfamiliar ground. The rocks that had been walls now became stepping stones. They moved close to her legs, small bodies brushing against her fur. The path she had walked alone so many nights now held 4 sets of paw prints. The dry wash was harder for the kits, their legs short, their paws unused to the bigger distances. Ash forged ahead, testing every new scent, tail jerking with excitement. Bramble stayed under Sage's belly as much as possible, his small body pressing against her leg at every sound. Thimble lagged and hurried by turns, quick to tire, but just as quick to start again when she nudged him with her nose. When they reached the edge of the town, Sage paused. The strange smells were stronger here: rubber, asphalt, metal, and the thick layered scent of many humans. The kits wrinkled their noses, ears flicking back, then forward. Somewhere a car passed, a low roar rolling over them like distant thunder. A porch light clicked on, then off, in a yard they could not see. Sage waited until the noise faded. Then she led them along the back line of the neighborhood, keeping to the deepest shadows, every muscle tuned to any change. Henry did not know that this night would be different. He had set the dish as he had the night before, this time closer to the shed, away from the open view of neighboring yards. He had stepped out carefully, glancing once toward the street where the barking dog lived, and then placed the food in a patch of grass that lay in a pocket of darkness between the shed and the back fence. On his way back in, he paused at the little wooden building. The shed had been there as long as he could remember, its boards weathered to a soft gray, its foundation sitting just high enough off the ground to leave a dark strip of cool shade underneath. "Never thought you'd be useful again," he muttered, giving the side of it a light tap with his fingers as he passed. Inside the house, he turned off the lights and settled into his usual place by the kitchen window. The glow from the television in the front room painted the hallway in a faint blue, but it didn't reach the back. He waited, eyes adjusting, breath slow. Sage slipped through the narrow gap where the fence didn't quite meet the ground. She tested the air in the yard. The man's scent was fresh, the meat's aroma strong. The dog's smell was fainter here, thinned by distance and wind. She guided the kits along the fence line, her tail brushing their faces to keep them close. The dish drew her first, as it always did. She went to it and ate quickly, tearing the pieces into smaller shreds than usual and leaving some scattered near the base of the shed. The kits watched, eyes wide, noses working furiously as the scents tangled in their minds. Grass, wood, human, food. Ash crept forward, paws uncertain on the flattened earth. He sniffed at a scrap she had pulled free and gave it a tentative lick. His face scrunched at the unfamiliar taste, then relaxed as his small body recognized the thing his tongue did not yet have a name for. Nourishment. Soon all 3 kits were nibbling at the scattered bits, their small jaws working, their whiskers smeared. Sage stood over them, ears forever tuned to the house and the world beyond the fence. Henry saw the movement first as a deeper shadow within the yard. The bobcat stepped into the dim light, just as she had before. But this time, as she moved, 3 smaller shapes followed her, 3 little knots of motion, lower to the ground, unsteady but determined. He leaned closer to the window without meaning to. "Well, I'll be," he breathed. The kittens, he could not think of them as anything else, were a jumble of oversized paws and short legs, their coats like softer, fuzzier versions of their mothers. One stayed pressed almost under her. Another ventured a little farther, batting clumsily at a stray leaf, before remembering the scraps at his feet. The third seemed to pause often, as if the world was a bit too big all at once. They were thin, but not as sharp-boned as she had been that first night. Their tails flicked and curled. Their ears seemed almost too large for their heads, the dark tips twitching at every new sound. Henry's throat tightened. "You brought your family," he whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. He watched as she guided them, nudging one back toward the deeper shadow when he strayed too near the open lawn, lowering her head to lick another's ear when he startled at a distant car door. When they finished with the scraps on the grass, she moved toward the gap under the shed. It was cool there, the earth still damp from long-ago rains that had soaked down and never fully returned to the air. The space was low but wide, smelling of old wood, spiders, and interesting secrets. To the Kits, it was a cave made just for them. To Sage, it was shelter, a place away from the open sky and the direct eyes of any who might wander past the fence. One by one, she sent them under. Ash squeezed in first, whiskers brushing the underside of the floorboards. Bramble followed, a little slower, turning in a small circle before settling. Thimble hesitated at the edge, looking back at her with a questioning chirp. She touched her nose to his forehead, then gently pushed him forward. From the window, Henry saw only the last part of it, the three small shadows disappearing beneath the shed, their mother's body blocking the entrance for a moment like a living door. He understood then, with a clarity that made his chest ache, what she had done. She had not only come to his yard to eat, she had chosen it as a place to hide what mattered most to her. Henry stepped back from the window and moved around the kitchen, his hands suddenly busy. He pulled the curtain a little tighter over the glass, leaving just enough of a gap for him to see out, but not enough for any neighbor's curious glance to stray inward. He checked the back door lock, not out of fear for himself, but out of a strange sense of wanting to keep the small world outside undisturbed. In the yard, Sage turned in a slow circle, checking every scent and sound, then lay down near the shed, her body curved toward the narrow darkness where her Kits now huddled. The hard concrete of the back step was a few tail lengths away, the house a quiet presence at her back. The hills were still hers. But for this stretch of hard season, this patch of dry grass and old boards had become something else, a second den at the edge of a human life. Between the house and the shed, under the same thin roof of stars, an old man and a wild cat kept watch over the same small yard, each aware of the other, in a way neither had quite expected. By late summer, the drought was no longer just a weather report. It was a daily fact that settled into people the way dust settled into the cracks of the street. On the television in Henry's living room, the news anchor spoke over footage of dry riverbeds and browned-out fields. A map glowed red and orange where the heat hit hardest. In one corner of the screen, a smaller picture showed Officer McKay from Animal Control standing beside his white truck, the department logo on the door. "Folks, with water and food getting scarce in the hills," McKay was saying, "we're seeing more wildlife coming down into neighborhoods. Coyotes, raccoons, and yes, bobcats. If you spot one, don't panic, but don't approach it. Keep your pets and kids inside, and give our office a call. We'll come out and take care of it." Henry sat forward in his chair, hands folded tight. The words settled into it, and "we'll take care of it" made his stomach tighten. He knew the town couldn't just ignore wild animals wandering through yards. Still, the thought of taking care of Sage and her three small shadows under his shed made his chest feel hollow. That afternoon, Mrs. Delgado's voice floated over the back fence again. "They had that officer on TV," she told her sister on the phone, loud enough for half the block to hear. "Said there's a bobcat in this area, maybe more than one. Tommy's coming this weekend, and I don't like it one bit." Henry rinsed his coffee cup, keeping his eyes on the sink. "You hear anything, Henry?" she called after a moment, leaning around the fence line. "Just the same as you," he answered, careful and even. "News talking louder than the wind these days." She sniffed, not quite satisfied. "Well, I'm keeping my grandson close. If I see so much as a whisker out there, I'm calling animal control right away." He nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Probably wise," he said, because it was something a reasonable neighbor would say. Under the shed, unaware of the words people traded over their heads, ash, bramble, and thimble grew. Days settled into a kind of rhythm. In the hottest hours, they stayed tucked in the cool shade beneath the floorboards, Sage's body a warm, steady wall at their backs. As evening came on, they crept to the edge of the shadows, watching the yard shift from sun to gold to blue. Crickets began their songs. A light breeze took some of the sting out of the heat. Sometimes, when the sky was almost dark and the neighborhood had quieted, Sage let them tumble out into the yard. They wrestled in the dry grass, batting at each other's ears, pouncing on leaves and on their own tails. Ash practiced stalking imaginary prey, belly low, tail twitching before he leapt at a clump of dandelions. Bramble followed, copying his brother's every move. Thimble chased after them both in short bursts, then flopped down to rest, sides heaving, eyes bright. From the kitchen window, Henry watched them and felt something loosen in him that had been tight for a long time. He didn't smile often these days, but he found the corners of his mouth softening as the kittens tumbled and rolled. Yet the world outside their small circle was tightening. Some nights, a patrol car rolled slowly down the street, headlights sweeping over parked vehicles and tidy lawns. Once, Henry saw the beam of a handheld spotlight glance across the front yards, tracing fences and shrubs. It didn't reach the back, not yet, but the sight of it made him ease his own porch light off earlier and pull his curtains just a bit closer. On Saturday morning, Tommy arrived at his grandmother's house with a backpack and a bouncing step. His laughter carried across the fence as he ran out back, a rubber ball already in his hands. "Don't go near that far fence," Mrs. Delgado warned, pointing toward Henry's yard. "Not until we know what's out there." "Aw, Nana, I just want to play catch," he said, already tossing the ball into the air and catching it again. "I'll stay close." Henry was out by his garden, pretending to check a struggling tomato plant, when he heard the ball hit the ground with a hollow thump and keep rolling. It wobbled over uneven dirt, bumped the low fence between the yards, and slipped underneath, coming to rest near the corner of his shed. Tommy trotted to the fence and dropped to his knees, peering under the slats. In the cool shade beneath the shed, Ash had been watching the strip of light at the edge of their shelter. The movement of the ball caught his eye, like a flicker of prey. He crept forward, whiskers twitching. Their noses met near the fence, the boys and the Bobcat kittens, separated by a few inches of air and a world of difference. Tommy's eyes went wide. Ash jerked back a little, then froze, curiosity and caution fighting in his small body. For a heartbeat, the two of them simply stared. "Nana," Tommy blurted, scrambling to his feet. "There's a cat under Mr. Cole's shed. A big one. I mean a baby one, but big for a cat." Sage moved instantly, her body sliding between the kits and the gap, her ears flat, every line of her posture saying, "Enough." The kittens backed away, pressing into the deeper dark. Henry straightened, heart pounding, and walked toward the fence before Mrs. Delgado could reach it. "Probably just a stray," he called gently. "Old Shed likes to collect strays. I'll shoo it off." Mrs. Delgado appeared behind Tommy, hand on his shoulder, eyes narrowed at the shadow under the shed, and then at Henry. "You sure that's just a stray?" she asked, "with everything they've been saying on the news?" "Stray cats show up all the time," he said, keeping his voice mild. "I'll keep an eye out. No need to worry the boy." Tommy looked disappointed, but stepped back when his grandmother tugged him away. Still, he glanced over his shoulder more than once, as if hoping to see those bright eyes again. That evening, the patrol car came by slower than usual. From his window, Henry watched the white truck roll down the street, the animal control logo catching the last light. Officer McKay sat behind the wheel, one hand resting near a spotlight that swept once across the front of each house. When it glided over Henry's place, he held his breath. The beam paused for a second on the sagging fence, then moved on. In the yard, Sage stayed under the shed until the sound of the engine faded. Her muscles stayed tight even after quiet returned. The human world felt closer now, pressing in through fences and windows and the older man's anxious scent. The close call came on a dusky evening when the heat finally broke just enough for people to open their windows. Sage was doing what she always did now, making a slow circuit of the yard, nose to the ground, checking the edges where the human smells met the wild ones. The kits were supposed to stay under the shed until she nudged them out. Ash and Bramble did, noses poking out just an inch or two to catch whatever stories the air might carry. Thimble, though, had caught a different scent. It was light and strange, sweet in a way that tugged at his young curiosity. A dropped crust from a child's sandwich near the front of the yard, blown back by the wind. While Sage's attention was fixed on a rustle near the fence line, Thimble slipped past her, his small body low, following the enticing smell. He squeezed through a gap in the hedge and found himself closer to the sidewalk than he had ever been. Out on the street, a car turned the corner, tires whispering on the road. Its headlights swept ahead, long beams of pale gold. Thimble froze in their glow, eyes wide, body a small, solid shadow on the edge of the pavement. The car's brakes squealed, not the long, terrible sound of disaster, but a sharp, surprised protest. The driver's voice burst out through the open window, a quick shout cut off as the car lurched to a stop a few yards short of the kitten. "Hey, did you see that?" the man called to someone on the sidewalk. "I swear I just saw a bobcat right there in the road." Thimble bolted, every nerve on fire, darting back through the hedge and across the yard, claws scrabbling in the dirt. Sage met him halfway, nudging him firmly toward the shed. Her body, blocking any attempt to veer off again. Porch lights came on up and down the street. A couple stepped out to peer toward the spot where the car had stopped. Mrs. Delgado shaded her eyes with one hand. "Bobcat," he said. She repeated, "That's it. I'm calling animal control in the morning." Henry, standing back from his own front window, closed his eyes for a moment. Under the shed, the kittens huddled close, shaken into silence. Sage lay at the entrance, her body a solid barrier between them and the open yard. Her world had shrunk to this small patch of ground and the lives hidden beneath the boards. Henry knew, as he watched the last of the porch lights blink off one by one, that time was closing in on their little arrangement. He could feel the decision gathering on the horizon, as real and heavy as any storm cloud. After the near miss with the car, the air felt heavier in the little house at the end of the street. Henry moved through his kitchen more slowly than usual, not only because of his age, but because of the thought that kept circling in his mind. Mrs. Delgado's voice saying she would call animal control, the driver's shout about a bobcat in the road, the news anchor's calm warning about taking care of wild animals in town. He stood at the sink and stared out at the yard. To anyone else, it was just a strip of dry grass, an old shed, a sagging fence. To him, it was more crowded now, a place where 3 small lives hid beneath the floorboards, and their mother paced, cautious and watchful. He reached for the coffee pot, then stopped, hand trembling a little. "If they come looking," he murmured to himself, "what are they going to find?" If he kept putting food out, there would be tracks, signs, proof that something wild had been living in his yard with his help. If he stopped, maybe, just maybe, Sage would take her kittens back toward the hills, away from patrol cars and pointed flashlights and worried neighbors. The thought of them leaving made something inside him sink, but the thought of someone in a uniform trapping them, or worse, hollowed him out even more. All day little things seemed harder. The heat pressed on his shoulders. His chest felt tight when he bent to pick up the mail from the front step. He told himself it was just the weather, just a poor night's sleep. He drank water, sat down more often, and tried not to picture a white animal control truck outside his house. As the sun slid down and the sky shifted from blue to amber to gray, He opened the refrigerator and took out a leftover piece of chicken. Habit moved his hands at first. He reached for the old dish he'd been using, set it on the counter, and cut the meat into small pieces. Then he stopped. The knife rested on the cutting board, his fingers wrapped around the handle. He could almost see her, in his mind's eye, slipping from the shadows, 3 smaller shapes, tumbling out behind her. The kittens batting at the food, their mother's steady stance between them and the open yard. "If I keep feeding you," he whispered, "I'm keeping you here, right in the crosshairs." He laid the knife down and covered the pieces of chicken with a plate. Instead of opening the back door, he slid the dish back into the refrigerator and shut it with a soft click. For the first time since he'd started this strange routine, Henry did not set a dish on the grass. He turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dim hallway, letting his eyes adjust. A faint buzzing sounded in his ears, and for a moment the edges of his vision blurred. He put one hand on the wall to steady himself. "Sit down, old man," he muttered, forcing a small, humorless smile. "You're not 20 anymore." He made it as far as the doorway between the kitchen and the living room before a wave of dizziness rolled through him, stronger this time. His chest felt heavy, as if someone had set a stone just behind his breastbone. The television remote slipped from his hand and landed on the couch cushion instead of the end table. He drew a breath, but it didn't feel like enough. The room tilted, slow and wrong. He took one step back toward the kitchen, toward the glass where he was used to seeing the yard at night, meaning to look just once more, to make sure they were all right. He never reached the window. His knees buckled, the world rushing sideways. He went down silently, landing on the worn rug beside the kitchen doorway. His hand reached out as if to catch the edge of the counter, but fell short. The house, accustomed to his quiet habits, gave no alarm. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant murmur of a television in a neighbor's home. Outside, the sky finished its slow fade into night. Under the shed, the kittens stirred. They had grown used to the pattern of their evenings. Sage slipping away for a short time, returning with new scents, clinging to her fur, and a fullness in her belly that meant their own would soon be filled. Their bodies woke before fully understanding why. Ash nudged the entrance, Bramble stretched, and Thimble blinked wide eyes at his mother. Sage rose and stepped to the edge of the shadow. The air was cooler than it had been in weeks. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, its voice thin and faded in the dry air. Closer in, the neighborhood sounds were the same: a car door closing, a screen door creaking, a dog barking twice, and then settling. She slipped out into the yard, the 3 small forms following her like echoes. They moved together across the grass, the kit's paws soft in the brittle stems. Sage led them to the place where the dish had always waited, at first farther out in the yard, then closer to the shed, then nearer the back step. Their feet knew the path as well as their noses did. Tonight there was only a faint circle pressed into the grass where the dish had once sat. Sage stopped. The kits crowded around her legs, sniffing eagerly, expecting the strong smell of meat. Ash pawed at the ground, then lifted his head, confused. Bramble put his nose down and sneezed softly at the stale, faded scent. Thimble mewed once, a small questioning sound. Sage lowered her head and tasted the air more carefully. There was old food scent here, yes, but nothing fresh. The man's smell lingered faintly on the soil and on the boards of the steps, but even that seemed thinner tonight, as if he had not come and gone as he usually did. She lifted her head and looked toward the back door. Inside, the lights were off. That, by itself, meant little. He often turned them off before she arrived. But the house felt still in a way that made her fur prickle. Houses, in her experience, had their own sounds: pipes ticking, machines humming, faint footsteps shifting weight. Tonight she heard only the steady, distant droning of the town and the gentle rattle of a loose gutter in the breeze. The kits milled around her feet, growing restless. Ash let out a low, impatient chirp and nosed her shoulder as if to say, "Where is it?" Bramble pressed closer, picking up on her unease. Thimble sat down and looked up at the dark window, round eyes reflecting the little light there was. Sage walked slowly to the base of the back step. The concrete felt cool under her paws. She placed one foot on the first rise of the step, then another, lifting herself until she stood on the small platform just outside the door. From there, the scents inside the house reached her more clearly. Old coffee, soap, the faint wax of the worn floor, and the man's smell, present but somehow wrong, spread out and low instead of moving along the usual paths. She pressed her nose to the narrow gap at the bottom of the door, breathing in. There. Under the familiar scents, she caught it, a sharper metallic hint of stress, the way animals smelled when they were hurt or frightened. Not blood, nothing so strong, but something strained, something off. Behind her, the kittens shifted, unused to seeing her on the step. They stayed below, tails twitching, eyes wide. The world had already shown them that new things could be dangerous, barking dogs, bright lights, roaring cars. Now their mother was standing closer than ever to the human place, and they did not know what to make of it. Sage lifted one paw and placed it carefully against the wood of the door. Her claws clicked lightly as she flexed them, testing. The sound was not loud, just a small tap in the quiet. Inside, nothing moved. She tried again, this time dragging her paw down a few inches. The soft scrape of claw on paint broke the stillness in a way no night insect could. Ash jumped at the sound, then forced himself to hold his ground. Bramble ducked his head, ears flat, then peeked back up. Thimble took a hesitant step closer to the base of the steps, drawn by the pull of his mother's attention. Inside the house, Henry lay as he had fallen, eyes closed, breaths shallow and uneven. The sound of her scratching could not reach him yet. His world had narrowed to the slow, stubborn rhythm of his heart and the weight in his chest. Sage scratched once more, stronger this time, leaving a faint mark on the door's lower panel. A few houses away, a window was open just enough to let in the night air. A child turned in his sleep. Someone coughed. A dog, hearing the faint noise and not understanding it, lifted its head and gave a questioning whine that faded back into silence when nothing followed. The street, for the moment, kept its secrets. On the back step, Sage lowered her paw and stood very still, listening with her whole body. Her instincts told her that something had shifted, that the pattern she had grown used to, dish on the grass, steady scent inside, quiet watching from the window, was broken. She did not understand what had happened on the other side of the door, only that the man's scent lay heavy and unmoving in the wrong place, and that the food that had helped her keep 3 small hearts beating was gone. She stayed there longer than she ever had before, poised between the wild hills and the human den, while her kittens waited below, and the night held its breath, just for a little while, before anyone else noticed that something was wrong. For a long moment, nothing in the little row of houses changed. Sage stood on the back step, her paw resting where she had scratched, ears tuned to the silence on the other side of the door. Behind her, Ash, Bramble, and Thimble shifted uneasily at the foot of the steps, feeling the weight of their mother's attention without understanding its cause. She scratched once more, a firm, dragging sound of claw against paint. This time, someone heard, but not the man on the other side of the door. Down the street, a small bedroom window was opened to catch what little cool air the night would give. Tommy turned in his sleep, then blinked awake at the faint scrape and the answering whine of a neighbor's dog. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, listening. There it was again, a tap, a rough, dragging sound that didn't match the usual creaks and sighs of the neighborhood. Curious, he slid out of bed, padded to the window, and pushed the curtain aside. From his second-story vantage point in Mrs. Delgado's house, he could see the back corner of Henry's yard. The shed was a dim block of shadow. The fence made a dark line, and there, on the small square of concrete by the back door, stood a shape he recognized from a flash beneath the shed. A cat that was no house cat at all. The bobcat's outline was clear in the thin wash of light from the neighboring yard. Short tail, tufted ears, strong shoulders. She was facing the house, not the open yard, as if she were waiting for someone inside to answer. Tommy's breath caught. "Nana," he whispered at first, then louder, "Nana!" In the next room, Mrs. Delgado stirred, grumbled, then heard the edge in his voice. She pulled on her robe and came to the doorway. "What is it, mijo? It's the middle of the night." "There's a cat," he said, pointing. "The big one, at Mr. Cole's door, right there. Look." She squinted out into the dark, following the line of his arm. At first she saw only the faint glow of yard lights and the square of Henry's back porch. Then the bobcat shifted, turning her head just enough for one ear to flash against the paler wall. "Oh, Lord," Mrs. Delgado breathed. "That's no house cat." They watched for a moment, pressed together at the window. The bobcat did not try to get in. She didn't snarl or throw herself at the glass the way a frightened animal might. She simply stood, then scratched the door again, a soft, insistent sound. "Why is it doing that?" Tommy whispered. Mrs. Delgado's brow furrowed. She thought of the news report, of the officer talking about bobcats in the neighborhood. She thought of Henry, quiet, stubborn Henry, who lived alone and waved off offers of help. She thought of the way his curtains hadn't opened quite as early that morning. "I don't know," she said slowly. "But Mr. Cole hasn't been out all day. You stay right here." She grabbed her phone with one hand and her house keys with the other. Instead of dialing animal control, she punched in 3 numbers she hadn't used in a long time. When the dispatcher answered, voice calm and practiced, she said, "I'm calling about my neighbor. He's elderly, lives alone. There's a wild cat at his back door, scratching, and he doesn't answer when I knock anymore. I'm worried something's wrong." Minutes later, red and blue lights painted the end of the street in pulsing color. Sage heard the siren before she saw the truck, a distant wail that grew quickly louder, the way a storm wind does when it rushes along the canyon walls. Her body tensed. Instinct screamed at her to flee, to gather her young and vanish into the safest shadows she could find. But inside the house, the man's scent stayed heavy and wrong. She held her ground until the first door slammed and unfamiliar footsteps hurried around the side of the house. Voices cut through the night, urgent, human, layered on top of one another. "Back door's here. Try the front first. Sir, can you hear me?" Sage backed down the step, drawing the kittens with her. They slipped toward the shelter of the shed just as flashlights swept across the yard, beams slicing through the dark. For an instant, one bright circle of light caught her eyes under the shed's edge, turning them to twin embers. A paramedic paused, blinked, then shook his head. "Something under there," he murmured. "Probably a stray. Let's just get to him." They forced the front door when no answer came. Inside, they found Henry crumpled on the rug, pulse faint but present, breath shallow. "He's warm," one of them said, relief in her voice. "Let's get him out of here. We've got a chance." As they worked, the Bobcat family watched from the shadows. The kittens pressed themselves into Sage's flanks, overwhelmed by the smells of sweat and rubber and sharp, clean medicine that drifted through the open windows. Sage's ears flicked at every shout, every instruction, every thump of boots on wood. When they carried Henry out on the gurney, Mrs. Delgado stood on her porch steps, hands knotted in her robe. Tommy hovered behind her, eyes wide. "Is he going to be okay?" he called. "We got here in time," the paramedic answered, already climbing into the ambulance. "That was a good call, ma'am." The doors shut. The siren rose again, then faded as the ambulance carried Henry away toward the hospital and whatever came next. In the sudden quiet that followed, the patrol car and the animal control truck that arrived a few minutes later seemed almost like an afterthought. Officer McKay walked the yard with his flashlight, frowning at the old shed, the scratch marks on the back door, the faint impressions in the dusty ground. "Whatever was here is gone now," he told Mrs. Delgado. "We'll keep an eye on the area, but with all this commotion, it'll probably clear out on its own." Under the shed, Sage stayed motionless, her heart a rapid drum in her chest. Only when the last engine noise had faded and the blue-red glow had left the sky did she finally relax enough to breathe deeply again. The next days passed in a different kind of silence. No one came into Henry's house. The curtains stayed drawn. The back door remained closed. Neighbors spoke in low voices over fences about ambulances and hospitals, about tests and keeping him for observation. The patrol car rolled by once or twice, then less often. Above the sheds and fences, the sky began to change. Clouds, at first thin and high, gathered more thickly each afternoon. The air shifted from sharp and brittle to heavy with a promise the land barely remembered. One evening, as Sage stood at the edge of the yard, nose lifted, a new scent filled the air. Cool, electric, clean. Rain. It started as a scatter of soft taps, then built into a steady patter that darkened the dirt and soaked into the cracks. The dry grass drank what it could. Dust rose, then settled. Far beyond the neighborhood, in the hills where Sage had once hunted, old creek beds began to soften, then trickle. Under the shed, the earth cooled. The kittens poked their noses out, blinking at the droplets that splashed near the entrance. Ash batted at one, startled when it broke on his paw, and vanished. For the first time in months, the world smelled like something other than heat and worry. As the days passed, the rain came in fits and starts, enough to bring a hint of green. Back to the brown hills. Small plants lifted their heads. The faint, sharp scent of new growth reached even as far as the back lot of the neighborhood. Sage felt the pull of it in her bones. One evening, when the clouds thinned and the sky turned a clear, soft blue, she stood at the back of the yard and looked toward the line where fences ended and open land began. The kits were larger now, their legs surer, their bodies stronger. They wrestled less and watched more. They were ready to learn what it meant to live where their kind had always lived, away from boards and bricks and human sounds. She led them out the way she had first led them in, through the gap in the fence, along the edge of the lots, up the dry wash that was not quite as dry anymore. With each step, the smells of metal and asphalt faded, replaced by stone, damp earth, growing things. They did not look back. Animals seldom do. Their world is mostly forward. Weeks later, Henry Cole stood in his yard with a cane in one hand. He moved slowly, thinner than before, but his eyes were clearer. The doctors had given him a list of things to do and not do. Rest more. Eat better. Don't ignore tightness in your chest. He did his best, but what stuck with him most was a simple line from a nurse as she checked his pulse. "Good thing your neighbor called when she did," she'd said. "Another hour, it might have been a different story." Now he looked at the back door, at the faint scratches low on the wood, at the old shed, at the space under it where the dirt was still a little smoother than the ground around it. "You got them to call," he said softly, feeling a little foolish talking to an empty yard. "Didn't you, girl?" The wind shifted. From the open lot beyond the fence came a scent he hadn't realized he'd memorized. He turned toward it, squinting against the low evening sun. Out past the last patch of mown grass, near the place where the land tilted up toward the hills, stood a bobcat. Her coat caught the light, a mix of gold and shadow. 3 younger shapes hovered just behind her, half hidden in the brush, taller now but still following her lead. For a long moment they were still. Henry gripped the top of his cane, not daring to move too quickly. He didn't wave or call out. He knew better than to break the thin thread that hung between them with too much noise. Instead, he straightened as much as he could and simply met her gaze across the distance. "Thank you," he said, the words barely more than breath. Sage's ears flicked once. Her tail moved in a slow, thoughtful twitch. Then she turned her head, gave a low, almost inaudible chirp that sent the three young ones bounding a few steps ahead. Together they moved up the rise, their bodies blending into rock and scrub and new grass. Within seconds they were gone from sight, returned to the world that had always been theirs. Henry stood there a while longer, listening to the quiet. The drought had receded, leaving its marks on the hills and on the people who lived in their shadow. But in one small yard at the edge of town, something else remained. The memory of a season when a wild cat and an old man, each pushed to the edge of their own loneliness, had kept one another alive without ever sharing a single word. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.